Good evening, dear colleagues. Welcome to another INGED Zoom talk. Today, our guest is Professor Dr. Richard Smith. Dr. Richard Smith is a professor of ELT and Applied Linguistics at the University of Warwick, UK. He is known for his work in the fields of history of language teaching and teacher development, and has published books for teachers and mentors. Well, he has, in fact, a very long biodata, but I will cut it short. And please visit his website to get more information on his works because he has lots of wonderful publications. The title of his talk this evening is Getting Feedback on Your Teaching. Thank you, dear Professor Smith, for being with us this evening, and welcome again. It's so nice to see you again. I'm going to leave the screen, so the screen is all yours now.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Aidan. It's really nice to be with you again, and Suzanne and all of you in INGED. Last time I was with you at INGED was five years ago, I believe, in Istanbul at the conference. And of course, we've had this pandemic since then, and now we have a terrible situation, of course, we must acknowledge in Ukraine. And I just wanted to let's acknowledge that, and that we're the people suffering there at the moment. But anyway, so we had these tough times. We still have tough times, but we are professionals. Let's have a professional focus today. I've known INGED for a long time because the only reason my biodata is long is because I'm old. So it gets longer as the longer you live. So I think I first came to an INGED conference as a main speaker. It must have been about 2001 or 2 or something. Oh no, maybe a bit later, 2005. But of course, before that, I've been to conferences in Turkey. I've been to Turkey a lot. My wife is Turkish, in fact, and from Izmir. So it's really nice to be with you, with Turkish teachers. I can see there are teachers from other places as well. Okay, so Aidan asked me to give a kind of practical talk today, or stressed that it should be not too academic, let's say. Well, anyway, that suits me because I never want to be too academic. But I decided to do this talk about getting feedback on your teaching. I'm going to share my PowerPoint, and I hope you can see that. Can you? Sure. Can you see that? Okay, great. Getting feedback on your teaching in this INGED Zoom series. I think I'm the 60th in the series. So yeah, I'm from the University of Warwick. I've been at Warwick University for 22 years, teaching mostly masters students from all around the world, and PhD students as well, and sometimes undergraduate students. Before that, my main experience of teacher training was in Japan for about 13 years. In my career as a teacher, whether it's at university or before that, high school in Japan, actually getting feedback from mainly from students, but sometimes from other teachers, has been very important for me. Reflecting on how I've developed as a teacher over these years, and still these days. When I have problems in my teaching, as we all do, and as we have had, especially during the pandemic, I think we've all had to learn a lot during the pandemic. For me, actually going out and myself getting feedback from others on my teaching, especially from students, has been very influential and useful for me. So for me, the most practical thing I thought I could share today would be this issue of getting feedback. And it does relate to something I've been working on a lot, which is helping teachers to actually do research into their classrooms. So I'm not going to use that word research very much. I'm going to talk about getting feedback on your teaching. Let's start just with, I'd like you to go to this Google Doc, if you don't mind. I'm going to put that link into the chat, and I'd like to invite you to go there. It's a Google Doc, and I'd like you to share some of your ideas on how to or how not to give feedback to students from your experience as teachers to students. Let's start with giving feedback to students. We're very familiar with that. It's a very important part of our. Can you see that link? I'll share that Google Doc as well. So here we are. We're in this Google Doc. I hope you've managed to go there. I can see that some of you are there already. Please feel free to fill in some ideas altogether. Let's share some ideas. So we might give feedback on writing, students' writing, for example. I just gave an example of, let's imagine you ask students to write about their family. It's the very first kind of writing we've asked them to do. How should we give feedback? How should we not give feedback? Feel free. You're anonymous. You're all anonymous. Just to say what do you think we should do to give feedback on writing or on speaking, on presentations, for example? What do you do? You could add some other situations, on the left-hand column here, if you'd like. Thanks for writing in. And then the question is, how do we do it in the second column? And also, what's the purpose? Why do we give feedback in the right-hand column? Or like, what might be, it could be ways not to give feedback if you prefer. And then what would be the effect of the kind of feedback which you don't approve of on the right? You don't, just write as many ideas as we can from your experience or your principles about feedback. The link is in the chat if you haven't managed to get there yet. Right. And let's think about the purpose, the reasons, the effects for giving feedback as teachers to students. Something we're very familiar with. Down here on speaking, some of you are looking at speaking. In fact, if we could carry on writing here. Could be quite an interesting document to have different people's views on feedback. But because of the time, carry on writing. But I'm just going to pick out a few things. And as I said, it's anonymous. So one of you said, focus on the successful parts in relation to our objectives, and encouraging students to make them go on with their learning process. So something very encouraging to continue. Yeah. Give helpful and concrete guidance. This is probably a general point. It doesn't have to be just about this example, by the way. It could be other examples. That's another interesting one, to make students reflect. Okay, that's one purpose of feedback, to encourage reflection, right? Try not to be too explicit. Okay, I like getting students to reflect on their mistakes. Well, that's another purpose, I think. To reflect, to make them reflect. That comes up a second time. Okay, and peer correction is coming here, giving opportunity for self-correction. Now speaking, don't interfere with the flowing conversation. I mean, perhaps I was guilty of this when I started being a teacher. If a student was giving a presentation and they made a mistake in Japan, I would say, well, don't say that. You should say that. Terrible, isn't it, to do that in front of their classmates, to embarrass them like that in front of their classmates? Yes, you've said not to make students embarrassed. Giving it, yeah, that's a great tip actually, to give feedback in plenary anonymously. So after you've heard the presentations, you write down some mistakes or some things you want to comment on. Don't mention the name. Just say, I heard this, and don't embarrass them. Yeah, this is really important, I think, with teenagers especially, but also with adults, with all people, I think. Don't correct every mistake. I think this is coming through quite well, isn't it? But that's just disappeared on my screen. Somebody's it's gone. Okay, it's gone. I'm not sure what happened, but maybe we can get it back. Let's just check if we can do that. Yeah, I think so. Not quite. Maybe one of you could press that back button. We could get it back. Anyway, the point was just to just have a little bit of a warm up, to reflect on the way we give feedback to students, different ways we give feedback, and what is in our minds when we give feedback. So obviously, in your minds, things about encouraging, asking to reflect, purpose being to bring about improvement, isn't it? I mean, that's the purpose of feedback, and at the same time, some things to avoid embarrassing, avoid too much judging. Yeah. Okay, well, we've had some examples there of how we give feedback. What is feedback? What is feedback? This is what feedback is. It's the unpleasant noise produced by electrical equipment, such as an amplifier, when some of the power returns to the system. Now, if I'd spent more time preparing this, I would now have a sound effect, and I would scare you off, or you'd all go away because of the sound effect, feedback. This is from the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary definition, but that's just one definition. But perhaps that's where it comes from. I should research this more. Maybe that's where the term feedback comes from, but we've extended that meaning perhaps into advice, criticism, or information about how good or useful something or somebody's work is. Okay, let's agree on this definition. But that doesn't really show us why we give feedback or why people give feedback. So I'm going to take this definition. Information about a particular behavior which is useful for improvement. So the information is useful for improvement. The information is about some kind of behavior. I think this corresponds with when we give feedback to students about their performance in English or on a test, etc. That's the particular behavior. And the point of it is it's somehow useful for improvement. Some people talk about feed forward. Feedback, feed forward. Actually, that's not really a real word. Oh, it is a word now because some people have used it, but I don't think we need to say feed forward, really, because feedback, if we use the definition here, let's say the purpose of feedback is to lead to improvement. Yeah. So we don't really need that word. For us as English teachers or future English teachers, the behavior we're talking about is students' performance. But today I want to focus on our own teaching, the feedback that we're getting, or not getting maybe, on our own teaching. So the behavior here is information about our teaching, which is useful for our improvement as teachers, ideally. Let's move the focus to our teaching. How often? So we give feedback a lot, don't we? That's a really important part of our job. But how often do we actually get feedback on our teaching? How often do we get useful feedback on our teaching? Over to you. I would like you to share in the chat what kinds of feedback have you received in your career? What kinds of feedback do you receive these days? Do you mind sharing in the chat any examples? I'm just waiting for you to write in the chat about some kinds of feedback. At the beginning of your career, Amanda, you said you got lots of supervision type feedback. Yeah, that's a very common experience when we are training to be a teacher. We get feedback from a supervisor about our teaching. I'm glad that you get positive, constructive feedback, Azra. I wonder, Azra, maybe from who do you get that good feedback? Feedback from students. Aleph is talking about that, and that's something I'm going to really focus on today. And Daphne says, nowadays I get feedback from the students if I arrange it. That's the important point, that we can proactively get feedback. And we can get it from students. We can get it from colleagues, peer feedback, Ada is mentioning. Pelin mentioned getting feedback on your assessed lessons. That's a particular kind of feedback, rather like the feedback you get when you are training initially. It's a evaluation, isn't it? for improvement, of course, but also for to get the module, to get the certificate. And several of you, like Suzanne, already collect very short anonymous feedback, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on as well. Amanda says now the feedback is not so organized, and it might not be so so common. It's what you can get if you notice it. And what I'm trying to do today is just let us all notice this fact that we maybe don't get as much feedback as we give, but notice the fact that it can be useful, but in some situations it can also be not useful, right? Just like if we overcorrect students. Have you had any examples of maybe feedback not being so great, not being so positive? What I want to focus on today is feedback which is constructive and feedback which is in your control. Not feedback that we just wait for from outside, but feedback in our hands, feedback under our control for our own development. And if we just think about it, which we maybe don't think about it usually, it might be useful for you. That's my thinking. So all of these different kinds of feedback, some of them are for evaluation, for a certificate. Some of them are feedback. These are three forms of feedback I've come across. Feedback can be for appreciation. You can just have feedback which is simply appreciating, and you're deliberately just appreciating someone. I don't think we get enough of that as teachers. I don't think we get enough of that from ourselves about our teaching. I don't think we get it. We don't sort of get it because we don't normally show our teaching to most people, or we don't ask for it. I think it can be useful. I think it can be very motivating for teachers if we can go out and deliberately, maybe, I'm just thinking this right now, maybe we could just go out and get some positive feedback. We could just ask, what are some good things about my teaching? You could do that next week or next class, and see what the effect is. And coaching is kind of in a particular situation where you're helping someone to develop, but it could be you helping yourself to develop. Let's focus on non-threatening feedback, because I think one thing we might think is if we go and get feedback, we have to be a bit brave. That's what some of you might be thinking, to even think about getting feedback from a colleague or getting feedback from students. What if they say negative things? This is face threatening. It is threatening. So let's try to make sure that we're getting non-threatening feedback for our own benefit and for that of our students. So just like we are thinking about feedback which is going to encourage students and not discourage them, just like before, let's think about how we can do that for ourselves, right? So first of all, I'm going to divide this into getting general feedback for ourselves, which is useful for ourselves, and then getting more specific, targeted feedback in part 2. And something I just have found very useful in my development as a teacher back in Japan, also here at Warwick, because I'm a teacher, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, but I see myself as a teacher educator, but I'm a teacher. When I teach my students here, I'm a teacher. And I sometimes have, not always, not necessarily very often, but I sometimes spend 5 minutes at the end of a class asking students to, a friend of mine in Japan called it think writing. So he said that because it's not, if they write in English, then don't worry about mistakes, just write whatever you think, whatever's in your mind, please the students. Actually, you can do it yourself as well. Write for yourself about the class and how it's gone. I mean, it could just be open, say, right, I'd like you to write to me about the teaching, about the class today. Very open question. Now, it could be in English if the students are good enough, but I think it could be in Turkish. Some people might say, well, that's not part of the English lesson. I would say, actually, it's very useful for English learning because it's going to be useful for you as a teacher. And I don't know if I'll come back to this point later, but I do think inviting students to give you feedback can be very useful for students themselves as a way to reflect on their learning. And so I think it has a purpose, and it can be actually useful for getting a better relationship between teacher and students. I don't know if I'll come back to that, but maybe we could come back to that in the questions if we don't. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the end of the class on pieces, it used to be on pieces of paper. I would collect all the pieces of paper. And as I said, you could ask them, please write some good points about my teaching. Okay, but what I tend to do is say, on one side of the paper, write good points. Just write bullet points. Don't write full sentences. And on the other side of the paper, write points to improve. Personally, I found this very, very interesting, very useful. It sometimes surprised me what they've said. And because you're asking for good points as well as points to improve, hopefully it's not threatening, because you can always contextualize the points to improve in relation to the good points as well. Another way, I don't use this, but some people say this is a better thing to do. Have 3 parts of a piece of paper. Just say, write about what you want to continue in the class, the way we're doing the class. What do you want to continue? What would you like me to start doing in the class? And what would you like me to stop doing in the class? Now, you don't have to accept what students say, and in fact, students say all sorts of different things. But anyway, this is another way to get feedback. You're still getting good feedback as well as things to start or to stop. But what you do, and what I want to focus on as well, is what you do with all of this information. And I think this is where an idea from research methods comes in, which is useful for teachers. It's a useful tool for teachers, because what you're going to get is a lot of different statements, a lot of different ideas from lots of different students. The more students you have, the more ideas there will be. And what you've got to do is group them, see what are the patterns, see if there are any common thoughts. And thematic analysis from research, this can be very useful for teachers, a practical tool. So you've got what I do is I used to type it all, actually. I type all of the comments into a document, a Word document. Then I would print it, and then maybe next to the different ideas, I would write a keyword to represent the topic, to represent the idea. And usually, if it was something positive, I would write a plus sign. If it was something negative, I would write a negative sign. And use this as a code, writing it next to all the statements which contain the same idea. And you can change the keyword or the phrase as you go along, or merge it with other ones as you go along. So this is a typical advice for doing thematic analysis. I'm going to show you examples. For example, let's say some students said these things. This is student A, said it's difficult to concentrate when the teacher talks for too long. These are all negative things, actually. Points to improve or things about their feelings, negative feelings. I lose concentration when other students misbehave. I get sleepy in the afternoons. If my teacher doesn't let us ask questions, I can't concentrate. After lunch, my brain feels quite slow. Other students talking too much makes me distracted. Well, probably you can already see there is a common topic here, actually, which is reasons for not concentrating. They're all giving a problem of not being able to concentrate. So you can already sort of make a category. And if we go through one by one, we could give a code. It's difficult to concentrate when the teacher talks too long. You could just call that teacher lecturing, and I might say minus because it's a negative thing. I lose concentration when other students misbehave. That's other students' behavior. I get sleepy in the afternoons. Afternoon, right? If my teacher doesn't let us ask questions, I can't concentrate. I gave that the same code, teacher lecturing, because I know it's a very different phrase, but it's the same basic point that the teacher's talking too much. Then after lunch, my brain feels quite slow. I mean, we could say lunch, but I've said afternoon. It goes together with C, I think. and other students talking too much makes me distracted. Well, other students' behavior, right? Okay, so that means that actually I can come to some conclusions just from these six different, very different statements. But I could say, well, students seem to have some difficulties concentrating when the teacher talks maybe too much or doesn't give a space for the students, when there's not much interaction. But also when other students are affecting them, making them distracted, but also when in the afternoon there are problems. So we can get some order from the chaos of all of the different kinds of statement. And I've got a real example from my colleague Peter, who a few years ago was teaching students, and sorry, we asked the same questions. So the students in a very big class actually we asked for good points and points to improve, and basically wrote all the different things that they said here into this document. And the points to improve were not so many, but there's a list there. So the first step is just to put them into one document, I think. The next step was this one, I think. Yes. So what I do actually, in reality, I don't usually write these codes, to be honest, because I do everything inside my computer now. So what I tend to do is move them from place to place. So once I've got the statements, I would move them around. I've already done that for good points. So the warm up, I put these together. You see, different students. And if students write different ideas in one sentence, I split them, I divide them. So all of the different ideas are in different phrases. He uses visuals very well. This is so long ago. It was using an overhead projector. But that was good. Interaction with students was good. Explained. Brainstorming. Personal qualities. He is a very friendly person. And again, the atmosphere was good. The activities were motivating. Materials. These were good things. Right. Other. Sometimes you can't put things into a category. There are too many different things. So that will have encouraged Peter. He will know what's some good points about his teaching. And I started to do it with the points to improve. So quite a lot of things two things about time. They felt they didn't have enough time to practice. And then a lot about vocabulary. Students were not very happy with the vocabulary, way of teaching vocabulary. And then some of these I haven't done yet. So I would just move that down to time like that. Let's have another look. Not enough time for reading. I would cut and paste that. This is what I would do about my own teaching. I think some of these actually might go together in terms of lesson planning. I might make a new category about sort of lesson plan. So I might call that lesson plan as a new category. Then this is just to demonstrate what I would do. Okay, so for me that sort of practice has been very, very, very useful for me to see good points, actually, things I never would have noticed about, never would have known about my own teaching, but also to identify some points to improve. And I've introduced my student teachers here to this approach as well. And just go back then to that's completely the wrong PowerPoint. To my PowerPoint, which I seem to have closed by mistake. Let me just find that. Let's go forward. Okay, so thematic analysis, that's a good kind of skill to develop, I think, as a teacher. Um, you might say, well, these are just some points from some students. And another idea I want to share with you is using, oh, can you see that now? Or I haven't shared it, have I? Let me share it. No. Yeah. Using students' responses, of course, you can get some idea of some patterns in what students have said, but you don't necessarily know how many students are feeling that or thinking in the same way. So something that I've done and I've found useful is to use what students have written in that kind of open way, that kind of reflective writing kind of way, to use that to make a questionnaire, and which can be given to all the students. I wouldn't say you should do this all the time. Making a questionnaire can be a bit time consuming, especially if you have to think of the items yourself. But what I'm saying here is you don't have to, because you can use the students' ideas for your questionnaire. And I'm not talking about you being a researcher. I'm talking about you being a teacher and what's useful for you as a teacher. So let me show one real example from my experience, which we actually wrote about in a chapter with Peter, my colleague, and another colleague, Emma, who's now my head of department. One day, so we together, us three, we have a course which we call professional practice, and we actually, this is for MA students, master students in their second term. They've never taught before, these students. Although they're doing an MA, they haven't taught before, they haven't got experience. So in the first term, we're teaching them about different teaching approaches. But we want to give them some kind of experience of teaching during the MA. And in the States, America, they often have a practicum as part of the 2-year MA. But in the UK, we don't usually do that, because we have a 1-year MA. But we wanted to at least give them some experience. So what we did was we get them teaching one another we call it peer teaching, PER, teaching one another, pretending to be students. And they will plan a lesson, a short lesson, and they'll teach it to one another. That's the basic approach. But what we do is we have them teach it at the beginning of the term, and we have them actually take a video and get feedback from the students, just like I've been describing, good points and points to improve, and basically their own reflections. We don't give them feedback ourselves. We want them to develop the ability to use feedback for themselves to develop their teaching. They then use all of that feedback to decide on a particular area to improve in their teaching. They go and read about that area. They also go and interview more experienced teachers. They also go and observe some classes just from that particular perspective. And then they teach that class again at the end. That's the basic structure of the module, of the course. So we like that. We think it's very student-centered. We don't give a lot of lectures. It's very project-oriented. So one day we got a letter. It was under my door in this office where I am now. It was anonymous, and it said I'm one of the students in this MA. I'm writing this letter to say something about our class. This is not just my opinion. Most of the students seem to be dissatisfied, and we were a bit shocked, because we kind of knew it wasn't perfect at that point. We knew the students were a bit confused, but we didn't think the students were that dissatisfied. Okay. And the reason she's claiming that, the reason is she or he, most of my students are female, so I'm guessing. The reason is, firstly, there's too much discussion rather than input. I strongly believe that not everybody's honest, and we don't want to offend against any of you. My students many of them are from Eastern Europe, Eastern China, Eastern Asia. Perhaps there is a cultural aspect that they don't like to criticize. So we talked together, and we thought, well, let's find out if her claims are true. So we used some statements from her letter to make a questionnaire. And it was quite important that we did that, because we discovered some things. Some things were true that she was saying. I just want to show you this isn't really the questionnaire, but it's the kind of questionnaire we made. You see the kind of typical strongly agree, neutral, disagree. Some people say don't use neutral because that if you don't use neutral, it will force them to not to just put 3 for everything, because that can happen. It will force them to say agree or disagree. But you can see, I think, that we filled in some of the statements. These statements were other statements we got from reflective writing from the students, because we did used to collect reflective writing from the students, and we thought that much of it was positive. So we want to include that in our questionnaire. But we also included her statements, and we learned by doing the questionnaire. This is actually the results rather than the actual questionnaire. Okay. But we learned some very important things from doing that. So back to the slide. So we did this. We gave this questionnaire. It was anonymous, and only one out of 19 agreed with her. There's no point doing peer teaching. So I didn't show you all the letter, but that's one thing she said. Too much discussion and not enough input. 13 out of 19 agreed. So the majority agreed. That was surprising for us, a bit shocking for us, but it's very important that we learned that. I'm personally dissatisfied with the course. 5 out of 19 agreed, 10 out of 19 disagreed. That made us feel better. But not just feel better, it was quite important that we know the truth in this area. And 8 out of 19 agreed that most students are dissatisfied. Anyway, we dealt with this. We used this as a way to cope with this situation. We didn't actually provide more lecture input, but what we did was to provide more support for students at this difficult time in the course when they were trying to think of their topics for their research. I just wanted to show that because I wanted to show that it was a problem that we solved through getting feedback, and teachers can take that into their own hands. They don't have to wait for students to complain in the end of course evaluation. You can use feedback as a tool during your class to improve it as it goes along. And I think that's important for teachers, because especially we have more and more regimes of judgment in our workplaces, where it's unfortunately come into our cultures, I think, from the States, where student evaluations at university have always been important for promotion, etc. It hasn't been the case in Britain, but it's now more and more the case that what students say is important, and of course it's important for the education that we give them if they are dissatisfied. But we can try to solve the issues as we go along if we are getting feedback and using that feedback to improve the situation as we go along before the end of the course. Just to say that generally, I get quite good feedback, but during the pandemic, as we know, all of us had problems. One thing was that some students went to complain about one of my courses, and the thing they were complaining about was videos. That I had to record video lectures. They didn't like the video lectures for some reason. I didn't understand what it was. So I was told this by another colleague who the students had complained to. So I used the same technique. I decided I would make a questionnaire to ask specifically, but in this case, online, using Moodle, because I use Moodle for my teaching. You can't see that probably, but number one question, what has been the best aspect? I think it's important, but we ask for good things about the class to contextualize any negative feedback. But also, what aspects would you most like to be changed? Be as clear as you can, because not just more recorded input, but what kind of recorded input would you like? So here I'm asking a targeted, focused question, because I knew this was what students were complaining about. And okay, so this was anonymous. In Moodle, you can do this completely anonymously, which I think is important. you get all of the feedback, and then I did the same thing. I ordered the feedback, good things, readings, videos, and some 5 people had strong requests for change. So I could understand better, much better, what they wanted. In fact, what they wanted was video input which related more strongly to the reading they were asked to do. I was giving very general lectures. They wanted something which would help them with the reading, which they were finding difficult. So I understood much better. And that, in fact, I started to do this every week at the end of the class for 5 minutes. If you do it outside class, if you say do this after class, I didn't get any responses. So I know if I do it for the last 5 minutes of the class with their laptops or with their phones in the class, I'll get the feedback, and that will help me. And so I asked each week because it was an important problem for me, you know. Even if I'm 60 years old, I don't like there to be complaints about my teaching, right? So I just wanted to talk about that, and how it's been important also in the pandemic for me personally, um, as a practical tool, as an important way to deal with problems, not just for doing research in general. Are there any questions that in the chat so far, Aiden, that I should respond to about the points about the?
Not questions, but there are some comments,
Yeah,
mostly about when to get feedback and whether it's better to have feedback during teaching, during the term, or
yeah,
at the end of the term.
yeah,
And people are expressing their own ideas, opinions, and
yeah.
talking about their experiences.
Great, please.
Can I raise a question here?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
The example that you gave was like more related to culture, which will be, I believe, a similar thing in Turkey.
Ah,
Teachers are expected to be source of information,
mm,
uh,
mm,
giving input.
mm,
So when there's too much discussion, when we ask their ideas, students may feel uncomfortable.
mm,
You said, of course, you're not going to change your philosophy or policy of teaching, but have you found a balance
mm.
between giving input, bringing more discussions? How did you solve that problem, or have you solved the problem?
I think it's never solved, is it? I mean, we never really completely solve problems. These are, there's always going to be some students who would like more input, and they may not know until the end, you know, how valuable it was to have had project work kind of work, and in that case, we solved it, I suppose, through discussing a lot through to one another, through looking at that feedback. That was the main point I'm making, and thinking what are the issues they're facing, and understanding that through the feedback. And I think it was that they kind of felt lost and confused at that point.
Mm-hmm,
So we
mm-hmm,
decided we would have some tutorials, which we hadn't had before. We're lucky we only had about 20 students, 30
mm-hmm.
students, and there were 3 of us, so we were lucky we could each go and individually talk with. I think in pairs. We did it in pairs.
But this is a master's program you're
The
talking
master's
about.
program.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we solved it in that way by
Mm-hmm,
giving more support,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
their confusion, rather
mm-hmm.
than giving more lectures.
Defne
Seemed to work.
Hocam has a question here. Do you share the results of the feedback with the class?
That's a very good.
Maybe the following week, for instance, she says.
That's a really good question. I think it's a very good thing to do. Yes. In fact, I did that with the this class I'm mentioning, the online class. Every week, I summarized their feedback in writing, actually, so I didn't use up the class time, and put it onto the Moodle. And they appreciated that. They liked that fact. They said at the end of the course, the end of the module, that each week I was getting their feedback, and I was summarizing the feedback and responding to it, and sometimes explaining why I couldn't do what they wanted. Often, actually, I'm not doing this because for this reason, this reason, this reason. I do think that that creates a a good culture in the classroom where you are collaborating with students and you're not you're not seeing them as the enemy. You know that we all had very great difficulties, didn't we, in the pandemic, and not knowing how students are reacting was a major issue for all of us.
Yes,
With
true.
especially when students' cameras are switched off all over the world, this was a major issue for students. We didn't have any feedback from that kind of feedback just in the
Yeah.
class from students' body language. So we just didn't know, did we? I mean, how the students are reacting. This is very stressful for us as teachers. Um, in fact, they and so one week I asked them one of in that those questions because they wouldn't my students would not want to speak out in front of others. They're first year undergraduate students, um, even if they so I used writing, and so I asked anonymously, why do some of you not use the camera?
Mhm.
And because it was bothering me. And I understood much better, that there are issues. We know there are issues at home and connectivity. But I could say back to the students, well, uh, obviously there are some problems of being at home and bandwidth or etc. But some of the students are saying they like it when other students have their camera switched on. So I could say that back to the students,
Oh,
and
okay.
it seemed to improve the situation a little bit
Mm.
because they had heard that in the feedback summarized back to them
Mm.
that their classmates wanted it, not just me saying all the time, switch your cameras on, which I'm sure we've all been doing without really getting much.
Yes.
Okay, I've got only about 10 minutes left, unfortunately. But I've been talking about getting general feedback, but we can also try to get more focused feedback for ourselves if there is a particular issue. I've already touched on that with my issue about in the pandemic and the cameras issue. But if we have a particular issue, until now it was general points to improve, but what can we do? Well, we can direct the feedback to our own needs and priorities. Again, I'm emphasizing feedback being in our control, in our hands, for our own purposes. And my ideas for this come from work I've been doing in recent years with teachers in Latin America, actually, with a program called the Champion Teacher Program. And it's the context is introducing teachers to a kind of research called action research, which and we try to make it as practical as possible and not academic, something showing how it can be useful. I'm focusing today on feedback. I'm not going to mention research really. Another context is India and Nepal. I've been working with teachers there as well. So, but basically, normal teachers in secondary schools, uh, quite difficult circumstances because the classes are quite large. Not academic research. This is research which is useful for teachers themselves. What we do is teachers like Miriam here from Pakistan, in large classes, they have many problems, and I'm sure some of these problems are your problems. Um, Large class, it's very noisy. She's doing pair work, but how to stop them? Too much homework. I'm sorry, too much homework to mark. Online students not participating. We already talked about that. Difficult to engage students in collaborative learning online. I'm sure you've had similar problems. So teachers like yourselves have many, many, many problems. And we are used to trying to solve problems immediately, almost like an octopus. I think sometimes we reach out to solve that problem, there's that problem, we're immediately trying to solve problems. And I'm suggesting that we can try to step back and get feedback before we start to try to solve problems. So, but first we need a starting point. So the starting point could be a problem, like the last thing, something that's not working, you'd like to improve, like Miriam. But a starting point could be something just you're not sure about in your teaching, or it could even be something that worked in your classroom. the point is we need to narrow down to one topic. How to narrow down to one topic? We might use something like this. You've got many problems or many successes. Which one particularly, if you think in your minds now, and we should really spend more time, this is like a workshop activity, but which of your problems or questions would it be most manageable to try to find answers to? Which is most urgent? Which is most significant in the sense of useful for more people, more colleagues, more students, and which is most engaging for you? We can use something like this to try to select a particular topic. So once we've got a topic, sorry, I'm going fast, but if you've got a particular topic in your mind, particular issue in your mind, the next step is to think about the questions that you're going to ask. Well, here's Miriam, and let's say she decided to focus on this topic. I have too much homework tomorrow. So then we can encourage Miriam to turn that into a question. That question is going to lead her into getting useful information or data, we would say, with if it's research or feedback, as we're saying today, in relation to a particular topic. Okay. So she can be in control of getting answers to her question through data or through feedback. But you can only do that really if your problem, the issue, you turn it into a question first. Questions are the starting point for research, or for getting targeted, focused feedback. You need to start with a question. How can I question is very typical. Okay, but she's also got, so what are the different forms of feedback can I use? And that can take her forward into, well, different things, like maybe asking other teachers for their ideas, which is what she did actually. But anyway, let's have another example. So these are teachers in Chile. They're brainstorming. They've already decided on a topic, a question. How can we involve parents into the English learning process of their children? Great question. This was 2000. This is 9 years ago. Such an important question during the pandemic, wasn't it? If we could have found answers to this, a lot of problems are solved, I think. So what they decided to do was break it down into more questions. They can't find the answers yet, but they decided they were going to try to find answers by asking parents about their current, attitudes. So instead of trying to solve the problem immediately, we encourage them to explore the problem, explore the issue by asking questions like this. Well, in relation to that topic, what do you already know? Or what do you still need to know? That's important to ask yourself. What do you not know about a particular situation? And so what are your questions? What are the questions that you might have about that situation before we start to try to solve it? I'm going to give you a reference to a book. I think it's a very practical book. I hope it is, called A Handbook for Exploratory Action Research, which would take you through these stages more slowly. But let's have an example of a teacher who the topic is my students speak in English in class, but only to me, not to each other in pair work. And one thing I've realized is some of the problems that teachers have in Latin America, or they're the same problems that teachers have in India and Nepal and probably Turkey. Teachers face the same issues. Problems are all around the world. One of the very, very common issues that teachers say is students are not speaking in class. Students are not speaking English in class. They're not participating. And teachers often think they're not motivated. So teachers often say, my students are not motivated as their main issue. But actually when they start to, and that's because they're not speaking in class, they're not talking in class. But actually when they start to research that and get feedback from students, they often change their mind. And they realize students are more motivated than they thought. And students want to participate, but they can't for different reasons. These are very common findings. But what we would do is we would encourage this teacher we would have a dialogue as a mentor, probably, with this teacher. Say, well, you say they don't speak to you, they don't speak to each other. Well, what parts of the class do they speak to you? Why do you think it's important for them to speak to one another in English? That's about your own perceptions of this situation. You can also encourage that teacher to think about what do the students think about this. This is a very powerful question, actually, about any classroom situation. That's going to lead into getting feedback about this situation from students. Other questions are about behaviour. In power, which students, you say students, but which students do and don't speak in English? And in power, when do they, let's be positive, when do they start speaking in English? So here's a question about behaviour. So I'm just saying there are different kinds of questions that you can ask yourself, that you encourage another teacher to ask, which will take you forward into exploring a situation. And we can then try to get focused feedback relating to particular questions in something that's bothering you. And from the work with teachers in Latin America, in Chile especially, but also with Nepal and India, here are some kinds of data, we say, to answer questions. We could call these different kinds of feedback, perhaps. So I've mentioned students' reflective writing. You can ask them to write about a particular topic. Here, in this case, what do they think about the issue? Of why when do they speak English? When do they feel comfortable speaking English? When do you not feel comfortable speaking English, and why? You could ask that kind of question. They could answer in Turkish. They could write in Turkish. Reflective writing. You could also invite a fellow teacher to take notes about your lesson. That's another kind of feedback. But here, the feedback is under your control, because you are asking that colleague to observe your class from the point of view that you personally are interested in. It's not the same as being observed when you are being trained as a teacher, because that's for evaluation. This is for self-development. It's in your control. You could record your lesson. You could make your own written reflections or notes immediately after the class. You could examine your lesson plans. You could notes or recordings of, sorry, that should be notes or recordings of interviews. Okay, so you can interview some students or have chats with students after class. You could do a questionnaire, but don't ignore reflective writing as a possible way to eventually make a nice questionnaire and not so burdensome for you. Pictures of your class, focus group interviews, students' work on tasks. These are all different possible kinds of data. But the important thing is that you should match the data source to your questions. And I've divided them here into some of those ways of getting data are good for exploring your own perceptions. Some of them are good for exploring others' perceptions, and others are relevant to exploring behavior. It's important to match the kind of feedback or data source to the kind of question. We don't have time to do this, but I'll just do it for you. So, for example, the problem, how does the classroom layout affect behavior? That's a teacher's question. That's all about behavior. So it would be things like 11 or 12, okay? Pictures of the class, going back to here, things on the right. Critical friends notes would be useful for that, for example. But a questionnaire wouldn't be useful really for that. But how do I try to get students, well, the last one, C, how do students feel when they speak English? The ones in the middle are very useful for that. Okay, so reflective writing or questionnaire. You can, I'll skip over that, but yeah, I have to unfortunately skip over that. I was going to share some stories from these books, but you've got the link there. I'll put that link into the chat as well, where you can have links to stories of teachers who have questions in their minds have particular issues in their minds. They have particular questions. We call them research questions, but they go and get particular kinds of data or feedback to answer those questions, and then they say at the end what they learned. And what they learned is how to solve a particular problem, just like I was talking about my own teaching. But more than that, you'll see they reflect how they feel more empowered, they feel more motivated, and they feel their relationship with students has improved. This is even more important finding, I believe, that takes them forward. And it's probably a good place for me to end, because that's where I would like to end. Just saying that feedback, getting feedback, can be empowering for you if it's under your control, if it's something that you are going out to get for particular reasons related to your teaching. So I'll end there. I'll give you the link to those those books, and I'm very happy to respond to any comments or questions that you have.
Thank you very much. I mean, it was an amazing session. Thank you. And the points that you have mentioned are so similar
Yeah,
to the problems that we have had here.
yeah,
It's amazing. So it's these problems are universal.
that's
And
indeed.
about the last part of your talk, when you mentioned that getting feedback empowers you, and you know, you can identify the problem, try to solve the problem.
Mm,
Sometimes you solve the problem for that specific group only,
mm,
because that solution may fail with another group of students. When you're working with human beings, there's no 2 times 2 is 4 kind of answer we have. So this never ends. This is a cycle. Am I right, Professor Smith?
yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, but it's the fact is these teachers that I've been talking about, they develop as well. I'm just saying the same thing again. That what they develop is a sense that they are not victims of their circumstances. As
Yes.
teachers, we can get very easily demotivated because there are a lot of reasons why we should be demotivated, actually, in education systems
Yes.
uh, around the world,
Yeah.
and things are not as we would like them to be in our circumstances.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think we should blame the circumstances in many cases and not blame ourselves, because we already get blamed enough from the outside. So we should be
Yeah.
supportive of each other,
Mm.
and we should. But I think it's useful. I mean, there is more talk these days
Yeah.
about well-being and of
Yes.
teachers' well-being, not just students' well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Still, there's not enough talk, I think, about teachers' well-being, but there is more than there was.
Yes.
And this is part of that. This is how I would situate what I've been talking about today.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. But the idea that we can learn, us feeling that we can learn, and that's why you're all here. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you didn't feel that feeling that you want to learn, that you can learn, and that it's valuable for you to learn. That feeling, that sense, is what keeps us going, isn't it? As teachers,
Yes. Yes.
uh, we enjoy sort of the fact that there are more things to learn. That our next class is unknown before we start teaching. This is a way of sort of coping with the unknown, I suppose.
Yeah. And I guess getting together,
Mm,
listening to like your talk, listening to other teachers' problems,
mm,
you feel that you're not alone. It gives you a sense of belonging, and it gives you a sense of, um, I don't know, hope.
yeah,
So I'm not alone. I'm not the only person suffering from these conditions.
mm.
Işıl Hocam has a nice suggestion. She says students can also be asked to provide feedback for prospective students of the same course next year.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That
Wow.
is that's an excellent idea. Işıl Hocam, thank you very much.
Mm.
Burcu Hocam, my God, she has written an essay here. How did you do that in such a short time? In Turkish culture, there is also the common anticipation that whether you're a learner of a language or a subject or a skill or a professional in any given field, you should be competent, fluent, knowledgeable to the nth degree. Yes, okay. Otherwise, you're a subject of mockery, regardless of your peers or counterparts' degree of competence.
This is important
Okay.
because I think underlying what Burcu is saying is that in when a teacher admits not knowing something, you know,
Mm,
in different cultures, it's easier than in other cultures, perhaps.
yes.
Um, and the authority of the authority of the teacher um, could be seen as diminished if they ask for feedback. You know, how to
Yeah.
negotiate that within a particular culture, and the particular culture is not just a national culture. It's a university classroom may be different from a
Oh, yeah.
secondary,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, or with children, in a school. Then I can make general points from my experience, but
Yes.
you have to interpret that, of course, in relation to your own context. Is all I can
Well,
say.
but
Yeah,
Burcu Hocam, don't forget that we are not teaching facts. It's not like we are science teachers, okay? We are dealing with language. Language is a living being. It changes all the time. And as non-native speakers of teachers of English, of course, there are things that we do not know. Today, just watching a YouTube video, I have learned a new expression. Make it 86 from Gordon Ramsay. Make it 86 means take it out of out of the menu. So
really,
throw it out.
I've
It's an
learned that.
expression. And most probably Professor Smith doesn't know that expression.
I do now. I didn't know that. Yeah.
See? So of course, there are things that we don't know. And I believe it's always nice. It's always right to be sincere with the students, not playing that, I know everything, know it all person kind of behavior. I personally admit I have never heard of that before. I'm sorry. Let's learn it together. Is there anything like that? How do people say it?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, uh, that is encouraging for the students as well. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think exactly. I think it's a sign of that. Well, it's good modeling for the students. It's being a good role model
Yeah,
for the students because don't we want them to go and study for themselves? Don't
yeah,
we want them to go and learn
of course,
for
of
themselves? We
course.
we only have them in our class. We want them to be learning and have a curiosity in order to learn outside the class. So if we show that we are learning,
Yes.
it must be good. Also, I just come back to the point that I've been emphasizing the value of feedback to ourselves because I think we tend to neglect ourselves as teachers. If I generalize, we tend to neglect our own well-being sometimes,
Hmm.
and do everything for the students because we are student-centered and learning
Yes.
centered. But we've been on strike. Well, I haven't been able to, but we've been on strike in universities recently.
Mm.
One of the slogans is our our teaching conditions are your learning conditions. Oh, sorry. This is what the students are saying in their
Right.
slogans. Our learning conditions are your teaching conditions. Well, they're both connected.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Well,
and
I don't know. I mean,
so what I wanted to say, Adam, was that um, you know the there are benefits which are not only for the teacher. I've been emphasizing the teacher because it's important to emphasize our own well-being and to do things for ourselves, for our own development. But they are getting feedback from students. That's been shown, in my experience anyway, to be beneficial, useful for students. useful for their reflection on their own learning, useful because they feel that they are cared for more.
Yes.
They feel that they are being listened to better if the
Yes.
teacher is getting feedback from them. That's very important. Many of the teachers in Chile elsewhere have said the relationship has improved. It's very interesting.
Yes.
A lot of the teachers have been saying, my main problem is the students are not motivated. I said
Mm-hmm.
that before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My students don't participate. Okay, well, go and ask them. This is what we encourage them. Go and ask students what they find motivating. Remember, I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
think of positives, not just negatives. What do they say they find motivating in the class, outside class? But what do they say they find demotivating, and why? And they get the data, they get the feedback, they look at the feedback. They're often surprised that the students are more motivated than they thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
they understand better reasons of not wanting to stand out, not wanting to, be corrected, etc. Um, they report. Somebody asked, "Should we report back?" Yeah, it's a good idea to report back to the students what you discovered. But in any case, just from that having happened, the teacher has been asking the students, the motivation increases or the
Mm-hmm.
participation increases. I'm not saying it's a magic solution,
Yeah,
but it's something that I've seen happening many times now with
true.
that particular issue. The reason being that students are being listened to, I believe.
Yeah. By the way, if you're interested in teachers' well-being and students' well-being, in 2021, our conference, INGED International Conference, was on that.
Mm.
And all of the sessions were recorded and you can watch them. It's all free on our INGED YouTube channel. Don't forget that nothing related to INGED is charged. They're all free because INGED is for you to develop, improve yourself. And we are here to help you do that. And with your help, we will also improve ourselves. As Professor Smith has mentioned, we do need your feedback to better ourselves and to find maybe a better way to reach you, to help you. Alev Hocam has a very nice comment here. Alev Hocam, would you like to unmute yourself and say it yourself rather than me reading it?
Sure, Hojam. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Hopefully,
can.
yes. We were talking about, I think, Burcu Hojam's comment, was it?
Yes,
It
true.
occurred to me that, yes, it's something cultural that,
Yes.
we our students expect us to know everything all,
Mm.
and we're not allowed to make mistakes. But that changes, actually. Sometimes I do, on purpose, make mistakes, especially about pronunciation, just to show them that it is okay to make a mistake. It's the natural process of, it's the natural outcome of the learning process. And then I switch on to how they can correct themselves and how they can use their mistakes to improve themselves. And just from there, I use it as a springboard to teach a few strategies. So actually, they like it when you make mistakes. They feel more comfortable participating and they accept their own mistakes and start to
Yes.
learn from their own mistakes. So I think it's something that we should often, maybe on purpose, do in classes.
Yeah.
I talk too
Yes.
much.
No, as Professor Smith has mentioned, it is being a good model for your students. It's only natural. We are all human beings. We can never be perfect. And by the way, it's not, you don't have to do it on purpose. Like a week ago, I believe I was talking about someone's height. I don't know why. Maybe it's the beginning of dementia or I'm getting Alzheimer's. I don't know because I'm not 18 anymore. I kept saying length, length. I hear myself. I'm saying, what am I saying? This is not correct. It doesn't sound correct. But my brain stopped functioning. So I couldn't recall the correct word. And of course, the very kind native speaker listened to me and very kindly answered all of my questions. And then suddenly I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I kept saying length. I was trying to say height."
Uh-huh.
And he said, "That's okay. I got your point. The context was clear." So it's so natural, you know. This thing sometimes plays tricks. It's amazing. Okay. Azra Hocam says, students mostly love motivating positive feedback in my classes. Who doesn't?
Mm.
We all love that. Uh, Professor Smith, what would you do if you received a very negative personal feedback?
Well, well, just like we all like to hear, but positive feedback. None of us likes to have negative, critical feedback. I'd feel bad. You know, I mean, definitely. But on the other hand, if I, especially if I got that in some kind of final evaluation, I don't know about you in schools, but at universities, I imagine you have to have a final evaluation, do you,
Yes.
from the students? Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, I kind of resisted this in my department, but in the university, generally, it can be that goes straight to somebody else. It doesn't come to you.
Mhm.
It used to come to us, and then we would summarize, and we would then send the summary
Mhm.
to the department. And I think that's a really big change. If that feedback is going straight to somebody else, that completely changes the relationship or changes the function of feedback.
It becomes evaluation.
Yeah, it becomes evaluation, and it becomes potentially dangerous for you as
Yes.
as a teacher. And we know that in those evaluations that students may give marks because of appearance or gender, you know,
Mhm.
and it's gendered according to appearance as well, which is unfair, and we know all that. So as far as possible, you know, I think we can fight to keep feedback something that's between us and the students. But even if that's not possible, we can be getting feedback ourselves, which might show a different picture from some feedback which is going to be bad for us.
Mhm.
So it's a kind of I don't like to say weapon. That's a metaphor I don't
Yeah,
like.
I get the idea. Yeah.
Some kind of alternative. But
Mhm.
even better than that, if we're getting that kind of if there is negative feedback, which is constructive negative feedback, if you know what I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
not destructive sort of stupid
Yes.
feedback, then it's better for us to get that early and to
Mhm.
try to work it out, try to work with that, I think, within that wider context. So yeah, I didn't really. Well, I did answer the question. I wouldn't be happy,
No,
but
no.
if it,
In fact, I would like to learn if you would have a kind of maybe a private conversation with that particular student
if
to
I knew
solve the problem, because you know sometimes student feedback is not that trustworthy,
not that what, sorry,
not that reliable and trustworthy. They
yeah,
can come up with something like, "You talk too fast,"
oh yeah, yeah,
or "I don't like your tone of voice. What can I do?" You know, that kind of thing. So, what I'm really curious is how would you react in such a situation? Would you just take it and try to deal with it yourself by yourself, or would you sit down with that student and say, "Okay, what is the issue? How can we? Do you have a suggestion for me?" Of course, my examples were really very crazy, but have I made myself clear? I don't know.
yes.
Okay.
But I didn't talk about this, but feedback being anonymous or not anonymous,
Hmm.
and we know, I think we all know that
Hmm.
if feedback is anonymous, and of course it can be more anonymous if it's online feedback, because I mean if you have that tool, Moodle has that tool where I really don't know who is giving the particular feedback.
Okay.
If it's handwriting, of course, you can kind of you know potentially you know who the students are.
No, that's the detective work, though.
But if feedback is negative, is anonymous, you're more likely to get honest feedback.
Yes.
And I think we'd probably like to have honest feedback for the purposes I've been describing.
True.
In that case, I can't directly talk with that
True.
particular student. But if I knew that there was that kind of feedback in the class, yeah, I don't know. I don't have the perfect solution to everything.
No,
But
just your personal opinion, of course. Defne Hocam, for example, says one student called me a snob in his feedback. And of course, Defne Hocam says, I didn't understand what to make of it.
yeah. But it makes you think, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
and we kind of have the tools to try to do something about it. If you remember what I was saying about taking individual statements and putting them into some kind of questionnaire. I know it's difficult to make a questionnaire item that says, "Do you think I'm a snob?" But how you could have a question, an open question like, "Do you have anything to comment about the teacher's attitude to students?" Or something like the student's attitude, the teacher's attitude to students is sort of looks down on them, or and you could also have the teacher's attitude to students is good, it's positive, to balance it. And it's a bit scary, I think. But if you did discover that there is a problem from the perception of the majority of students, you could work on that, I think. So,
Yeah. Defne Hocam, I also think every now and that you're a snob.
oh dear.
No, she's a dear friend of mine. We are together on Inget board. We work together, so she knows that I'm kidding. Oh well.
By the way,
Good.
I mean, there is something managers I think managers, somebody was saying this to me the other day, when we become a teacher, we can get quite a lot of mentoring and feedback. And when we become a manager in a university, here, for example, they get quite a lot of training to be a manager. It's between those two things. We don't really get much mentoring or feedback. For example, if you become a manager here, they offer you something called 360 degrees feedback. It's quite scary, but they ask your colleagues for honest feedback, anonymous feedback about that manager, and they can get that feedback. And anyway, it could be negative, it could be positive.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your ideas and experiences with us. My dear colleagues, would you like to ask any more questions, or shall I close the session? It's almost 9:30. I don't think that, yeah, we have that pointing fingers everywhere. I failed because of that teacher. It's always put the blame on someone else. I love that culture of ours. It's always someone else's fault. It's never our fault. Yes, people are thanking you. They're sending you flowers and hearts and oh my
Thank
God, you need to see the chat box. Valuable, informative, beneficial. That's great. Smiling faces, lots of hearts.
Good feedback. Thank you. Positive feedback.
If you're interested, I can send the copy of the chat box to you later so that you can see all the nice feedback here.
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
with us and sharing your wonderful ideas. And my dear colleagues, you can always reach Professor Smith using his website. Some of you I know want to get the slides. I don't know. It's my dear colleague's decision whether he wants to share them with you or not. please contact him directly. And if he permits us, we are going to publish the video, hopefully. Let's keep our fingers crossed next
Yeah, you
week.
can.
Next week, and you can watch and yes, here you have the email address in the chat box. Please note that down. And we will have another speaker with us next week. Thank you,
Okay,
Dr.
thank you.
Smith. Thank you very much. And hope to have you again with us.
Hopefully in Turkey.
Oh my God, I hope, yes.
I missed the conferences in Turkey. It was,
Yes, yes. We had a lot of fun together. I remember the session. It was
Yeah.
my young learners session or reader session. We laughed a lot. It was a very good, we had great fun.
Yeah.
We will hopefully keep our fingers crossed. Keep
Okay.
yourselves, make sure that you're safe and I don't know, take good care of yourselves and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Goodbye.